in one direction than the other. So we get this kind of amplification, this sort of back and forth as we're swinging through. So when we're looking at rowing, what we want to be able to happen is we want this pelvis to be able to shift forward so that we can get forward on these sit bones, those little, usually, if you roll long enough, tender little spots in the seat, you're like, my butt's sore, okay? We want to be able to, as you've heard me talk about a lot, of being able to get in front of those sit bones, okay? As we do this, we now are in a much more mechanically efficient place as we're coming up with our legs to get weight, to get force into our feet. Follow me so far? Mm-hmm. Now, if my pelvis is possibly orientated differently, the efficiency of doing that is going to be different on one side than the other. And so as I come up, even the muscle tissue, I'm going to be susceptible to finding one side easier than the other, and the boat is going to be like, okay, no problem, we'll just go over. The difference here between why we may not notice this on land versus water is that land is fairly stable, so we can run, we can do lots of interesting things, and we don't even, it's like below the radar, we don't even notice it. We get in a tippy environment like the boat, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, things don't work. So if we know what's going on with our pelvis, we then can hopefully start to change some of this. Take your shoes off, please. So, while you're doing that, which side is the one that typically is the one that falls?
I think this one.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to check this out, and you guys are going to observe here. You think. We're going to verify. Come on to standing, please. So what we want to know is, at this particular point in time, are there any significant imbalances in how Helga's pelvis is orientated? And there's a couple simple ways that we can look at this, and then also look at the range of motion. So first I want to just check to see, assuming there's no significant variations in the sort of anatomical design. How many people, if they've gone to the doctor or something, have been told they have one leg longer than the other? I've heard this before, and it's saying like leg length discrepancy. So there could be possible discrepancies in the actual length of the bone. Most people are not exactly, if you measure them like to the micron, are not exactly the same size around. But usually if we're finding significant distortions in alignment, this has more to do particularly with the pelvis of the actual orientations of the bones rather than the actual size. Okay? Follow me so far? So if we look at the actual crest, the tops of the hip bones here, let your arms just hang. Shift around in front so you can see this. You just stand. Come on, gather around, don't be shy. Get in front. Let your arms just hang.
Pelvis.
So, if we come in and look at Helga's pelvis, you can see the difference? Here's the top of her hip bones. So, right now, her right side is higher than her left. Can you all see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have that. Now I'm going to attempt to mobilize these bones one at a time, and we're going to see what's the orientation. I've already got a hunch by seeing that the right side is higher, than I'm guessing that her right ilium is tilted forward, which is going to make it much easier as she comes up to shift into the right foot, which is going to cause the boat to do what? Right. So, let's just check this out, verify it. So here's the bones. I grab a hold of her pelvis, let your arms just hang. You're doing nothing but just standing there. If I get a hold of her pelvis and then try to rock it, you just stand still, Helga.
Yeah.
If I try to tilt her right pelvis forward, can you feel how I'm getting muscle tension right away? It does not want to move forward much.
Right.
Let's try and tilt it back. Oh yeah, it'll come back. Let's try your left side. Will your left side come forward? More so than the right, but there's some tension here in the muscle right in the low back. Will it come back? Not as much. Can you feel that?
Yes.
So in terms of your pelvis, what we've got is sort of something that, in terms of, we're going to look at mimicking walking, so the rotation and twist. I want to kind of like do this and see what goes on. So here, if I try to rotate her pelvis this way, you feel it just doesn't want to go. You feel like there's not much movement. Compare it to the other direction. You feel that difference?
Oh, yes.
You got this?
Yes.
So we have already set up in her pelvis this little kind of a torque. So when she's rowing, there's going to be a greater susceptibility as she's coming up, assuming there's nothing else significantly contributing to this, that there's going to be more weight rolling into this side. So she could be deviating through here. This is not an, like a complete sort of one fixed solution to everything, but we understand that right away her alignment is not very symmetrical. So that as she starts to move in an unstable environment, the way her mass rolls through at some point, whether it's on the recovery or particularly when you get to the catch. At the catch, at some point, you are going to have to get contact into your feet. This is a simple physics leverage. Boat is not going to go if you do not have resistance in your feet. If you ever had loose foot stretchers, you discover this very quickly. It's like, I can't do anything. So whether you are able to, get forward and flexible enough to shift or not, the simple fact of the matter is that the boat is not going to go anywhere until you have resistance here. So at some point you're going to have to shift, and if you shift in a way that's not even, the boat's going to say, oh, teeter-totter, wait here, boat go here. And being able to kind of reverse engineer to understand why this is happening, sometimes in the moment of, Nick was saying, is like, oh, I can relax a little bit, not freak out so much when I'm in a double. It's like, yeah, there's all this other neurological stuff that's going on. It's sometimes hard to miss these subtle details because there's all these other distractions which then, tap into all these lovely little primitive structures in our brainstem down here, which don't really care about this. It's like, this table, and without us really being kind of aware of it, we're tensing up. So we would like to keep our brainstem and all these little primitive brain structures nice and calm, so we can, rationally think and feel this through. So to do that, we need to make this a very stable environment. Thank you, Helga. Somebody else. Who else has been having this one? We want to verify this.
No, I have no problem.
Come on up. Shoes off, please. So as I said, this is not the end all, but it's a very important piece to understand how am I aligned, and then also the understanding that if I'm in this way, this is most likely not just from rowing. There's probably a lot of other stuff that we're doing outside of rowing that is creating these imbalances and rowing this. So let's see where Mike is. Take a slight step back, please. Perfect. So before we do this, has there been a side that seems to be that you've noticed?
Yes, I think this side I'm tighter in the back.
Ah, interesting. Okay, let's find out what your pelvis has to say about that. So just let your arms hang. So we come in and say, actually here in my situation, this pelvis is much more level than we saw with Helga. You guys see how my fingers are at the top of his hips are much more even here from side to side than what we saw with Helga. Can you guys see this here? Okay, so the discrepancy is not as great. So this would kind of match up with what I'm seeing with Mike in terms of his movement. His boat is, pretty stable. He's not consistently getting any kind of falls and crashes off like Helga's getting. If I try to rotate his pelvis forward though, man, his right side does not really want to move forward much at all. Doesn't want to come back. Oh boy, no, it's like trying to pull a donkey uphill. It just doesn't want to go. If I try to take his left side forward, oh boy, I mean it goes a little bit, but man, it's not super excited. And it doesn't really want to come back much. Can you feel all that?
Yeah, I know I've had a lot of hip tightness.
Yeah.
Try to get
Right. So he's had a history of low back issues and things like that. So fortunately for the time being, his pelvis is rather stable. So this is good. He's going to keep a very stable boat, but it also doesn't move much. So like for things outside of rowing, this could be potentially a problem if we got this big mass of like tight. So when he walks, the mechanics, his pelvis is not going to be able to accommodate a lot of that twisting motion. But when we're walking, we're still creating this rotational movement with our limbs. So there's going to be some twist occurring somewhere, and most likely, this is then going to have to occur, keep rotating, somewhere right in through here, which will put more strain on this tissue, okay? Which then potentially could create some problems if you then add something like stabilization of rowing and then just running up. So again, this idea that there can be these underlying tissue imbalances or discrepancies in function, which then rowing can amplify in different ways.
And good land workouts to get hip flexibility, yoga.
Something as simple as starting to be aware of what kind of things am I doing chronically that would possibly cause my hips to be torqued unevenly.
It's the hula hoops.
Driving, sitting at work, lots of different ways where even if I'm just this in a meeting, there's different pieces of how I'm torquing my pelvis, and most of us here, we've got some sort of professional career. We probably have been working on this for a long time. It started, when we first started having to sit for long periods of time in some sort of formal education. So start adding the years up, adding the hours. We're talking about a lot of exposure. So if we want to help our pelvis move into a more balanced place, there are a couple things that we can look at. We can definitely look at some sort of mobilization, tissue mobilization outside of rowing. So things like yoga, things like body work, where you're actually getting the soft tissue to change, and then hopefully, if then you have more range of motion. If you actually pay attention to how you're using your body, you can theoretically allow it to get more stable and stay more stable, which is going to make the experience out there much better. Okay? Something as simple as when you're sitting in your office, just being more aware, and even in your car, of do I tend to stand or shift my weight over onto one side or the other? Without changing anything in your body right now, I want you just to do an honest little quick scan of your body and see, am I standing with more weight on one foot than the other? How many people will notice that? There you go, right there. So we have hand dominances, we usually have a leg dominance. Something is like, what's my go-to wheelhouse? Just like, standing in line wherever. All of this is going to put more load into one side of the soft tissue, which is then eventually going to distort the alignment of the bones. And then we get out in the environment here and say, boy, this is really tough.
Yeah, but if you're standing and you're feeling uncomfortable, should you just stay standing uncomfortable, or should you shift?
It's a very great question. So some of the stuff that Mike was talking about, so depending on how many choices we've made in this succession, this timeline, we can get to a point where the range of motion, the tissue has deteriorated enough where just being able to stand effectively is not very comfortable. Instead, we're constantly fidgeting around trying to find stuff, because it's just, when we go vertical, the load, the interaction of our body mass and gravity is vectoring down this way when we're standing here on planet Earth. And so the tissue is going to have to accommodate. There is going to be some muscular traction to stabilize, and then usually we're not static, we're moving. So even as we're walking, there's a constant relationship of stabilization that's occurring. Same thing that's happening out on the water, only in the water we also have this wobble and tip. So we want to make sure that we are looking at kind of improving the range of motion of this tissue so that we are just more functionally adaptable. Okay, so things like yoga, and if we're even just simple stretching, asking our body to do particular movements and see, can I actually do that? And like, oh, my body doesn't go that way. It's like, okay, we want to make sure we're working on this to open this up more. Does that answer your question?
No.
No?
If you're uncomfortable, should you shift your weight?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Move around.
That makes sense.
Yes. And keep in mind also with rowing, we are conditioning ourselves, and probably already self-selected ourselves, to continue to do activities even when we're in discomfort. It's kind of one of the pieces with rowing. And so it's this nice little dynamic of, hopefully we are working on the sort of soft tissue, the malleability of our body, so that we're in appropriately the right ballpark so that we can continue to kind of work efficiently. But usually as we kind of go through life, we're going to have these little deviations of things that we do, or new little tweaks to sport. And as we keep with this repetitive motion, many times in our stubbornness to kind of do things, we may exacerbate these issues. So the difference between I'm just working out, I'm doing this, and there's this level of experience of fatigue that comes with doing some sort of aerobic activity, and that fine line between that and something's talking to me, but it's not just muscle fatigue, or after I stop the piece and come back in, I'm still feeling it. That's an injury. And if I hopefully can nip that in the bud by taking some sort of proactive something that's going to mobilize that or heal that tissue, then hopefully I can keep my body functional in the healthy bandwidth. But if I ignore those pieces, which many times I'm inclined mentally and neurologically to do on rowing, is just sort of shut out my body, just keep pushing, just keep pushing. There's stuff that can be happening that I'm not even noticing. And then all of a sudden it's, oh, my back, or oh, my knee, or whatever it is. So doing some sort of body awareness is very helpful to make sure that we are monitoring what's going on in our body so that we do not have some sort of huge injury. And then, I mean, stuff I hear with patients all the time, it's just sort of like, I don't know, what were you doing? Nothing. It just happened. It's like, oh, this has been going on for years, and unless you just got hit by a truck on the way to my office, This did not just happen overnight. Oh yeah, I had pneumonia. Oh, I had that surgery. It's like, and then, oh yeah, I hurt my knee. And it's like, right, keep talking. So there's all these things that happen to our body. Virtually everything that we do with our body is unbalanced. So we have to take proactive measures to make sure that we are keeping this body in balance, particularly for a sport like rowing, where stability is, as Nick was talking about, critical. Because if the boat's not stable, we are just not going to be relaxed, and then, if we're not relaxed, it's more likely to kind of do stuff that's not going to work well for our body. Okay?
All right.
Questions?
When you learn the typical rowing, do you want me to stop? I'm sorry. I'll ask you privately. When you learn the typical rowing stroke, they say, you're at and hands away and body over. You're talking about the pelvis,
The hip roll.
If you've been listening here this year, and last year, and the year before, not so much about the body over is a common way to describe it. What we're looking at is primarily the ability to shift our weight on the pelvis, so we can get connection into the feet. Depending how much flexibility we have there may be a necessity to have more flexion with the spine to actually accomplish that. And so when we start to do that, that's where we start to run into some issues, because this and this and this is less efficient.
Yes.
It's going to create more load in the tissue.
Yes.
Okay?
I won't
More
ask
next
any
week.
more questions.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
All right, off you go.
Whoa.